first section of our constitution, which which says that rule of law is one of the founding values of South Africa. Our country is based on the supremacy of the constitution and the rule of law. The rule of law, of course, as most if not all of you know, encompasses aspects such as the principle of legality. Government must abide by the law. Separation of powers. We don't want the legislature and the executive doing the same thing. We want their mandates to be separate. We want there to be checks and balances between the two. Human rights must be respected. We want an independent and impartial judiciary. All those elements together and other aspects make up the rule of law. And some argue that democracy is part of the rule of law, and others argue that it is a separate principle. Either way, the two are closely linked, and both of those are supposed to create trust in the state and a legitimate state. Now, 2024 is not just an election year for South Africa. I think, as many of you know, it's perhaps the election year globally. More voters than ever in history will head to the polls in this year in at least 64 countries, plus the European Union, representing a combined population of about 49% of people in the world. So this year is really the election year, not just in South Africa, but globally. And these elections will prove consequential for years to come. In Africa, more than a third of the countries on the continent will head to the polls this year. But aside from the theory, what is the state of the rule of law and democracy? We as academics, and activists, and officials, we can debate the rule of law conceptually, theoretically, and have all kinds of views and opinions of it. But what do citizens make of the rule of law? And what is the state of the rule of law and democracy? Does it indeed create trust and legitimacy? Now, I looked up a few statistics on the Afrobarometer, which is like one of the most, I think, very important, wonderful work that they do, collecting information on all kinds of matters such as these. And Afrobarometer's picture, the surveys are quite bleak. In South Africa, few citizens approve of government's performance. Only 28% approves of government performance in sanitation. Electricity is even less, 12%, quite understandably so. More than 8 in 10 South Africans believe corruption is increasing. And a growing proportion of respondents say that most or all officials in key public institutions are involved in corruption, including the presidency and in parliament. But 2/3 of South Africans, 65%, support elections as the best way to choose their leaders. But actually, 30%, which is quite a sizable percentage, actually says we need to look at other ways of establishing leadership. 70% of South Africans are dissatisfied with the way democracy is working. And in 2021, it was the first time that a majority of respondents, 53%, indicated little or no trust in the judiciary, which had always been a beacon of stability, independence, and impartiality. So trust in nearly all institutions is low and declining. In 2021, it was only the media, interestingly, and the Department of Health, I don't know why they are so special, that attracted a majority percentage enjoying the trust of citizens. And that's 3 years ago, and I think it'd be interesting to see what the same survey would yield now. And then for me, the most startling statistic is this one. 2/3 of South Africans would be willing to give up elections if a non-elected government could provide security, housing, and jobs. Almost half, 46%, would say they would be very willing to do that. So as South Africans, we seem to be quite willing to give up elections in return for better service delivery. And what made this statistic even more interesting is that the higher the level of education of the respondent, the more likely they would be falling into this category of willing to trade democracy. So quite remarkable. What do we make of all of this? What does this mean for the rule of law and democracy in South Africa? And what's the debate elsewhere? What can we learn from other countries, other regions? How are they engaging with these kind of questions? Are we the only ones with such declining trust in government and rule of law and democracy? That's the topic for today. And again, I welcome you to this discussion. We brought together a wonderful panel of experts, both in academia and in practice, to discuss these issues with us. Before I introduce them, I first want to thank the Hanns Seidel Foundation for supporting us in this seminar. Yolanda Lacey and her colleague are there at the back. Yeah, we always appreciate your support and engagement, and wonderful to have you here with us. And there will be a little housekeeping. There will be an evaluation form circulated. Nothing gets done without being evaluated. We need to know what you thought of this seminar and whether it was of any value to you. So please, if you have the opportunity, just fill out the evaluation form as it gets handed around. And the online participants, please, if you can, follow the link in the chat box to also fill out the evaluation form. It's just, I think it's about 3 or 4 questions, so it shouldn't take you too long to do that. So once again, thanks to the Hanns Seidel Foundation. Their mission, of course, is to support rule of law and democracy, and I'm very grateful for their support. Right, let's then start with the content of the debate. We'll have 3 inputs, fairly informal. They're not formal academic papers. They are just, they are perspectives from practice, from research on these questions of declining trust in public institutions. We'll have the 3 of them present, and then after that, there'll be an opportunity for us to engage in a short Q&A. So I'm going to introduce them one by one as they make their presentation. So let me start off with Professor Henk Kummeling. He's going to kick off the introductions. So he has many titles, which I cannot list. There are too many. His most important title, though, is he's extraordinary professor at WC. So that's where we begin. Also, in his spare time, he is the Rector of Utrecht University, where he's called Rector Magnificus, which is a beautiful title of the leadership of the university. He's also a distinguished professor at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. He's a former chairperson of the Electoral Council, what we would call the independently called commission. He was a chairperson of the council for many years, and currently is chairperson of the State Commission on the Rule of Law in the Netherlands. So that is a commission that was instituted by the government, by the national government, with a very specific mandate to comprehensively, and I suppose once and for all, examine and conduct research on the rule of law and report back to government on the state of the rule of law, particularly from the point of view of the citizens. It's on the back of a number of things that went, I guess, horribly wrong in the Netherlands, where citizens were not treated well by government institutions, prompted the government to institute this state commission, which is due to present its report, I think, sometime this year, if I'm not mistaken. So he is, I think, very well placed to get us going on the discussion of rule of law from the perspective of the citizens. So please help me to welcome Professor Kummeling.
Yes, absolutely. Is there a need to use the microphone, or do you prefer? Okay. Thank you very much, Chair, for your very nice introduction. Dear colleagues, dear students, dear friends, dear all. As already was stated in the invitation for the seminar, and already said by the chair, indeed this year will be a very important year worldwide for elections for the principles of democracy and rule of law. And almost half of the world's population is going to the polls. But some of these elections will have nothing to do with democracy because there is no choice, or there is no opposition, or opposition has been effectively silenced. For instance, in Russia. And other elections will be very exciting, with the major concern being that populism will gain the upper hand in many countries. Open societies are worldwide under pressure. And populism, which claims absolute truth and seeks solutions to social problems by excluding individuals, groups and institutions, is gaining more and more ground in many countries. And we know this for sure also in the Netherlands. Since the House of Representatives elections in November of last year, it's also the case in our country. A populist party, the Party for Freedom, as it is called, well known and led by Mr. Wilders, is now the largest. And the question now is how to combat these populist parties is also being considered on a global level. Banning is being considered, especially when it comes to extreme right-wing or left-wing groups that clearly undermine the democratic constitutional state. But there are also proposals to raise thresholds and to regulate the conduct of parliamentarians during parliamentary sessions. And it has also to do with the fact that parliaments worldwide have become unstable. The use of social media is also responsible for this. Politicians are increasingly concerned with serving their own supporters, whom they seek out through social media, which have increasingly become echo chambers of their own identities and ideas. Apart from the fact that it is becoming increasingly difficult to organize some kind of a consensus on how a country, a province, on a municipality can move forward, it also means that representatives are more concerned with using the attention-grabbing instruments such as questions, motions, and much less with complicated, time-consuming work of creating good legislation. This is all fertile ground for populism. As mentioned yet, one of the main facilitators for populism, namely that the institutions of the democratic constitutional state do not deliver what citizens expect of them. In fact, citizens regularly find themselves in trouble because of the way these institutions function. And it's perhaps for that reason that at the end of 2022, in the Netherlands, the three state powers, not only the government, the three state powers, parliament, government, and the judiciary, did set up a state committee. The committee whose mission is to come up with proposals to improve the functioning of the rule of law from a citizen's perspective. And I was asked to chair that commission. And what I want to do in my talk is the following. And how does this thing work? Chair is indeed. Yes. Firstly, I would like to briefly consider a few terminological issues, in particular to the concepts of democracy and the rule of law, that's already been alluded to. I'm aware of the fact that the treatment of terminological issues does not immediately, let's say, create great enthusiasm, but I think it's necessary because there's quite a bit of confusion on the interpretation of these concepts internationally, and misunderstandings and lure. Then I would like to consider the assignment of the State Commission and how we will give substance to it. And the core question in that respect is how we can ensure that the state powers realize again what they were intended for, precisely to protect citizens, not to constantly fight mutual competency in disputes or determine who is in charge, but to protect citizens and to make it possible for them to develop and prosper in freedom. Finally, I return to the beginning of the development and interaction between democracy and the rule of law. And it took a very long time also in the Netherlands to weave democracy into the rule of law. We only succeeded in doing so in the Netherlands at the beginning of the 20th century when universal male and female suffrage was introduced. In the current era, it almost seems that democracy is pushing away the rule of law, or at least a specific interpretation of it, namely that democracy means that the majority decides, which result that the minorities of whatever nature are in trouble. The fact that these kind of views arise and that we run these kind of risks is also due to the fact that the institutions of the rule of law do not perform sufficiently. This leads to dissatisfaction, distrust, and even fear of the government. And all this becomes visible during elections. And that's the beginning of a vicious circle. In a sense, the State Commission in the Netherlands is trying to break this circle by coming up with proposals to make the rule of law better function for citizens in trouble. Yeah. Probably have to solve it. Okay. This is the terminology slide, and for I think that at least for more than a century, constitutional lawyers, historians, political scientists, and other scholars have been struggling with the concept of democracy and rule of law. Sometimes using very comprehensive variants, which include also the democratic elements of the decision-making process when it comes to the rule of law. And it goes also the other way around, very thin interpretations that focus primarily on procedures and legal protection. Rest assured, I'm not going to add any new exegesis to the pile of literature that's already there today. Especially, I would like to indicate how I interpret the concepts here, and that's on the slide. And I must admit that it's mainly a continental European way of interpreting the concepts. So you have some kind of idea what I'm talking about when we talk about democracy and rule of law. Please, just take on the following slide. I was asked to chair a unique state committee, unique in particularly due to the fact that the assignment comes from all the three major state powers: parliament, government, and judiciary. And it started, I think, all this something that already the chair alluded to, the fact that we had a terrible affair, a nightmare scenario in the Netherlands on child allowance. And it short involved parents who were confronted with the incredibly harsh, even discriminatory refund actions by the administrative authorities. And the judiciary did nothing to help them, with the argument that they were simply applying the law. But the child allowance affair does not stand on its own. It stands for a much bigger problem. And that bigger problem is to a large extent reflected in the assignment of the committee. And I only present a brief version of the assignment in 3 slides. And the number of slides already indicates, it says what the problem is with our assignment. The assignment has its difficulties. If you look at the main things, that's the key thing, and we have to come up with all kinds of proposals to promote the rule of law. Please, the following slide, the mutual relationship between the states. Then we have to do something about measures and decisions by the legislator, administrative bodies, do something about legal protection, and we have to pay particular attention to the following 5 points. But you could do the other slide, the next slide. It's about also how these powers in the state interact between each other. And that's a very interesting and difficult concept. There has to be separation of power, but there's also a form of collaboration between them, and all kinds of things that have to do with appointment procedures, better information exchange, also improvement in access and accessibility to the state powers, and the mechanism of a rule of law agenda. Now, this assignment has its difficulties, and I will not explain all of them, but for instance, the citizens is already a diffuse concept. Who is that citizen? Who is in trouble due to the function of the state powers? Further, the assignment of the State Commission also resembles an abundantly decorated Christmas tree, in which balls have been hung by one of the members of the 3 state powers. which do not have the same attractive shine for all three state powers. For instance, when it comes to the secondary activities by members of state powers, like the first chamber that we have, the Senate that we have all kinds of jobs on the side, but also the judiciary. They are considered to be a problem because they could organize distrust amongst citizens. And, who am I dealing with? Is that person still independent? If he has also a job on the side for another authority, or biased? Others would say that these combination of functions are very welcome because they organize a deeper understanding of what needs to be done. Another thing is, for instance, also the rule of law agenda. The rule of law agenda is something new in the Netherlands. Some people came up with that idea that each state power, but also on each level, the provincial and national, and also the municipal level, the authorities have to set an agenda together on what has to be done in the upcoming year on improving the rule of law in that specific area. But yeah, how to, of course, a wonderful idea, I think, but how to prevent this coming to be only a procedural thing. Once a year meeting, heaps of paper on the table, and that will be it. Okay, so the State Committee that we have has 9 members, and of course it's composed interdisciplinary. There are lawyers in it, there are economists in it, historians, communication scientists, social scientists, and people who have really a lot of practical experience of politics. And initially we are mainly concerned in making our assignment manageable, also because as soon as we were set up, the outside world wanted to transfer almost all world or nation suffering to that State Commission, and the rule of law seems to be infinitely stretchable. We subsequently did a lot of research, gave study assignments, especially to the Netherlands Institute for Social Research, and we asked that institute to bundle all existing knowledge about democracy and the rule of law from a citizen perspective in the Netherlands. And they came up with these kind of results. Indeed, there is still a vast support in the Netherlands for both principles, rule of law and democracy. But, and I think that's about to a large extent compared to what the chair was mentioning when it comes to South Africa, there is a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction of the functioning of the politics in recent years. Main things are there's no deliverance, no results, so there's an issue with problem solving capacity. And I think in many cases also due to the politicians themselves because they raise too many expectations. There is also an issue of the lack of responsiveness. And that implies that there is a problem with the extent to which results respond to the needs of and wishes of citizens. And people indeed complain about the fairness of the outcome of all kinds of procedures, the fairness of results. And as is also in the report of the National Institute, the Netherlands Institute for Social Research, there is a big danger there. Because part of the population is open to this idea of having a strong leader who can deliver according to the wishes of the majority, the democratic majority, setting aside the protection of minority groups. Well, that's, I think, a very relevant result. We did have a lot of conversations with affected citizens to identify core problems. And for me, the peculiar thing that happened was that we wanted to talk with people who were not being seen by the authorities. People who are even scared of the authorities because whenever a letter reaches their mailbox, it's a threatening thing. They have to pay something or they have to be removed or other issues. And we said to each other, we definitely want to talk to these people. What's going on? What are their core problems? What are the real issues there? And then we organized ourselves several meetings in all provinces in the Netherlands, and organized by a special bureau. And they said to me, and they said to all the members of the State Commission, you are not allowed to attend these meetings. And I asked, well, why am I not allowed to attend. Because you're already a threatening authority. You being a professor, the state commission, people will simply not talk to you. And I think, well, I thought to myself, well, I'm so accessible. I'm such a nice person. Why should they not allow me to talk to them? But in the end, they say, okay, go away. And the fact that we did that organized a lot of trust already amongst a lot of people. And we brought many of them together just a couple of weekends ago in Utrecht, the center of the Netherlands. And then I was allowed to talk to them. It was a nice experience. Because well, they had real problems, real issues, and also were invited to come with real solutions for their problems. We a very interesting experiment. Yeah, well, we looked at a bundle of literature, all these surveys. We asked the institutes, a lot of research is being done. We had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, also with young people in government and in judiciary and in parliament. So, well, you're the young ones, and you have to come up with new ideas. And we ask them all come up with, give us the relevant issues, give us the relevant solutions to these problems. And we came to the conclusion that there was at least 5 core tasks where we have to focus on when it comes to improvement. First of all, we have to look at the strengthening of listening and communication skills. There's a big issue there, and I'm quite sure that also in South Africa, the government uses all kinds of language, the authorities use all kinds of language, the judiciary uses language that's simply not understandable for ordinary people. There's also this problem with the many administrative counters, as we call it, the siloing of all kinds of institutions and authorities that do not communicate with each other. And the result is that ordinary citizens have to go to all kinds of desks and many desks to come up with a solution for their big problem. For forced evictions, for instance, you have to go to several counters, and who's going to help you? So we came to the conclusion we have to make sure that these desks work together, or perhaps there even should be only one desk. There's also an issue with the judiciary. When it comes to accessibility, the amount of money that you have to pay for lawyers, when it comes to access to court, but also when it comes to coming up with new ideas of solving disputes. In many cases, the judges fragment a certain problem that the person has to deal with in order to make it, let's say, fixed as a judge. Yeah? You can deal with it as a judge from a legal perspective, but hardly ever organize a solution for the ordinary people. There's also this thing of having a healthy interaction between state powers, sharing information. That indeed in the Netherlands is a big issue that parliamentarians wanted information from the government did not want to give it. But also the other thing is that the parliamentarians are complaining about what the courts do in their decision-making process. But and also in the interest of the court's decisions, they're simply not understandable for ordinary parliamentarians as well. It's that they give us warning signs. They give us clear and clear-cut information on what we have to do if there is a problem with presidential election. So that's a thing. And the other thing is also very important, is improving the ethos, the culture of the administration of civil servants. There is simply not enough understanding of at least fundamental principles of the rule of law and democracy. If you work there for the government, if you work there for the judiciary, all these civil servants have at least an idea about what they are doing, and also that they act there in their capacity with power. And that power is in many cases is huge, but you have to use it in a way that complies with all these fundamental principles. And we said to each other, now we're working on these the 5 core tasks, and we have to come up with solutions as concrete as possible, with not coming up with all kinds of new inventions or new ideas, but there are a lot of good practices already there, and a lot of municipalities. We have to use them. And we have also organized ourselves a clear view on the financial consequences of what we come to propose. purpose. So that there will be money there will be a budget there. You need to use your money to do the good things. And it was not clear to everyone that setting up a state with principles of the rule of law and democracy cost really money. And to be on the safe side, we as a committee therefore have already submitted a financial claim to the negotiating parties in the current cabinet formation. And in that same vein, we pointed out that all ministries should feel and carry the responsibility for the rule of law, and not only the Ministry of Justice. So it has to be in the budget as well. Then the absolute democracy thing. As I said before, there are several reasons for the rise of populist government. I've just discussed one of the reasons, namely the greater satisfaction, even distrust about the function of the government, the institution of the rule of law. They are too preoccupied with themselves, at least in the Netherlands, with the results. Well, see what happened also in the report of the Netherlands Institute for Social Research. And the dissatisfaction is partly visible during elections. And that also happened in the Netherlands at the end of last year with the party of Wilders coming up in front. And if we are not careful, the rule of law eroded under the banner of democracy. And it was worried that the initial negotiating parties in the Dutch cabinet formation had talks on the need to respect the constitution and the fundamental rights. They were in search of what they called a baseline to agree upon on this. And of course, all parties said that what they wanted to respect the constitution. But that is, of course, not the only thing that matters in a well-functioning democratic state. It is also, and perhaps even more, about living up to informal constitutional culture. As Levinsky and Ziblatt write in their impressive book entitled How Democracies Die, two norms are functional for a democracy: mutual tolerance and institutional forbearance. In short, the first norm implies that political rivals have a right to exist, and if they have views that are not treated, and that the other one is not treated as an existential threat, and that the existence is legitimate. And forbearance implies patient self-control and restraint. You do not stretch your powers to the limit, thereby limiting the rights of others who may also one day be called to power. Playing for keeps is not something you do. I come to the conclusion. My talk was mainly about the situation in the Netherlands, but I think that a lot of issues are also relevant in other countries as well, and partly also, I think, also. We have to improve the deliverance of state powers, all state powers, and administration that field rule. If we don't do so, we will feed the sentiments that will enable a further breakdown of the rule of law through seemingly democratic methods. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Kummeling. That was a very inspiring kickoff of the discussion. There's so much in the talk that you gave, but I think the one thing that I want us to take away from it is the risk of democracy pushing away the rule of law. And we also see it as one concept of rule of law, democracy. It's also part of the same corner of ideas, but here we actually see that the strength of democracy can push the rule of law away. In both jurisdictions, we see this issue coming up where people are saying we actually wouldn't mind a strong autocratic populist leader. Let's sacrifice some democracy if we can just get service delivery improved. So I think very, very interesting observations. I made a mistake and I said the commission is appointed by the government, and that's wrong. It's very interesting. It's good that I made that mistake, because I think it's something that we as South Africans can look at. That's interesting, that courts, the government and parliament joins hands and saying we have a problem. and we need to discuss and investigate and come up with better solutions for the rule of law. Something I'm not sure whether our constitutional dispensation has ready-made mechanisms for that, for the three arms of government to come together and pose a way forward, something to ponder. Anyway, thanks very much. Let's move on to Cherrel. So we're going to do a bit of
I can squeeze this one.
musical chairs, and I'm going to also organize a chair for them. I'll sit here in front. So let's listen to Cherrel Africa. She is an associate professor in the Department of Political Studies here at UWC. Many of us know her as a professor and a teacher and a staff member. Before working at UWC, she worked at IDASA, famous Institute for Democracy in South Africa. She did that for 8 years. She served 2 terms as a chair of the Political Studies Department, also a term as Deputy Dean of the Economic and Management Sciences faculty. And I think many of us also know her from the TV and the radio, where she often gives commentary on elections and democracy. So she is a very well-respected scholar on political studies. So over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. So on the technical side, and I find I don't need to do anything for the online audience. Okay. So let me just start by thanking Jaap and the colleagues at Dullah Omar for the invite. I do appreciate it, and it's quite a bundle that you gave in terms of a topic. So I will try to pull those strands together. And I'm very appreciative of my esteemed colleague for providing some depth on the rule of law, concept of the rule of law, and in many ways it complements my presentation. Okay, so in terms of the overview of my presentation as well, and just to say, in the seminar you're going to go from the global to the very personal, and you'll see why, actually. I will also touch a little bit on rule of law, elections, and accountability. And then I'm going to look at some of the data on participation trends in South Africa. And I'm going to refer to the data you actually touched on at the beginning, the Africa data around trust. And then I want to come to voter behavior and the debate around voter behavior in South Africa, because that's of course the flip side of the turnout question and the declining turnout. And then I'm going to come to possible explanations for declining turnout. Not all the explanations, but I will touch on that. So just to start off on the more theoretical stuff, and I'm citing O'Donnell over here, 2005. And as I say, it complements very much what has been presented, although the point about democracy and the rule of law being bundled together, it's something we can think about. Yeah, I really defer to my colleagues in the Faculty of Law. But what he presents, this author, is that citizens, in terms of the rule of law, equal before the law, laws are clear, publicly known, universal, stable, it's fairly and consistently applied by independent judiciary. Okay. The author also says that it's hard to advance a positive definition of the law and argues against rule of law in a minimal sense, and argues for this notion of a democratic rule of law, which ensures political rights, civil liberties, mechanisms of accountability, which in turn affirm political equality of all citizens and constrains potential abuse of state power. And then comes to accountability, and there's these different types of accountability. You've got horizontal accountability, vertical accountability, and he argues that only under democratic rule of law will the various agencies of electoral, societal, and horizontal accountability function effectively without obstruction and intimidation of powerful state actors. And only when the rule of law bolsters these democratic dimensions of rights, equality, and accountability will the responsiveness of governments to the interests and needs of the greatest number of citizens be achieved. And then he says, and it's very hard to reach, it's easy for the rule of law to be subverted in democracies. So now I want to come to the personal story, and you will see why, you will understand why. Last week, Friday, I did a podcast on elections and democracy. And the first question the interviewer asked me was, what's your memories of 1994? And I said, look, I need to tell you a story so that you really understand the sentiment for me of 1994. And I proceeded to tell him the story, one story about my father, Daniel Francis Stevens. Okay. And so I want to tell you the story, and I want to relate it back to the rule of law. You see, when it comes to the theories, I don't know in law, maybe you're less political and political scientists, but in political science, the theories are ripped to shreds, and then we reconstitute. And so I just wanted to bring this personal story. So my father finished his high school in the late 1940s, and he had a deep love of marine life and the coast. And his desire was to study marine biology. So in the late 40s, probably 1949, he achieved the academic results at high school to gain entry to study marine biology. And that was quite a significant achievement, completing high school, etc. And so he went up to a university in Cape Town to ask what is the process to register and study marine biology. And he was told in no uncertain terms that colored people cannot study marine biology, and that he should go to Utrecht teacher training college, because that is what colored people are supposed to do. They are allowed to become teachers, and there's a couple of other jobs which they can do. After the podcast, my brother actually phoned and said it was a lot worse than that, but be that as it may. And so here comes the link to my memory of 94, and here comes the link to the rule of law. My father died in March of 1993, which is a year before the democratic elections. So not only was he unable to vote in 1994, he also never got to experience the coastal beauty of South Africa. And I have memories of us going to beaches designated for, only for white people. But it touched me that he never got to experience, not only did he not get to experience the new democracy, not only did he not to get his career of choice, but also the opening up of those spaces. So if I related back to the issues of the rule of law, and as you say, there's so many different definitions of democracy, there's so many features of democracy, there's so many conceptions of the rule of law and how it all fits together and all the rest of it. But what stands out for me is around this lack of freedoms, those rights, that equality of opportunities, etc. And so I hope that's a bit illuminating, but this is an academic seminar, so I will come back to the academic side of things and move to accountability. Okay, and just a little bit more on the theoretical stuff. So this is according to Diamond and Molino. And they differentiate between horizontal and vertical accountability, but the focus here in terms of elections would be vertical accountability. And they define accountability as the obligation of elected leaders to answer for their political decisions when asked by citizen electors. And it's what citizens can demand in the course of elections and campaigns. Now, they argue that there's certain contextual conditions to enhance vertical accountability. For one is high turnout levels. The other is a credible threat of electoral alternation. And then they say this is made possible by information on political actions, knowledgeable and engaged voters, institutionally strong political parties which offer pragmatic alternatives, and an independent and pluralistic mass media. Okay, so I will return to this. But what we do know is that voter participation has declined dramatically in South Africa. And this is particularly when considered as a proportion of voting age population. So oftentimes when we see the turnout statistics, it's turnout as a proportion of registered voters. The situation is much worse when we look at it as a proportion of everybody that could vote or eligible voters. And so what we see is in 1994, there was a turnout of 86%. Of course, registration wasn't required in 1994, down to, and this is as a proportion of all eligible voters, 72% in 1999, and then more or less around 58%, 1 percentage point difference or so, in 2004, 2009, and 2014. And then in 2019, it declines to 49%. So you've got 51% of all eligible voters not voting. And what those figures indicate is that a substantial proportion are not registering and they are not casting the ballot. And so those are the raw figures. And of course, bearing in mind that it's valid votes cast, and my colleague from the IC will tell us this much better than me, but it's valid votes that determines the distribution of decision-making power, the seats, etc. So the source of this is Schultz-Herzenberg. And here we can see, so for example, in 2019, 35.8 million eligible to vote, 17.4 million actually cast in their vote. So that's that percentage of 49%. And now I want to come to this debate around the voter decision-making process. Okay. And it is a long debate, long-standing debate in South Africa since 1994. And really there's almost two sides where there's a group that sees identity-based voting as the primary way of explaining voting decisions. I do not subscribe to that view. I subscribe to a view of bounded rationality, or what the literature calls gut reasoning. So what that theory says is that people reason through their choices, but within the parameters of their lived experience, the informational networks, and many other parameters. So taking that approach says that yes, long-term factors are important, and long-term factors could include things like economic structure, social divisions, racial classification, etc., religion, language, geography. And we can argue about what's a long-term factor versus a medium-term or a short-term factor. Medium-term factors could include family, socialization, party loyalty, and there's a whole discussion about party loyalty or party identification, seen as a cognitive cue to make sense of this overwhelming amount of information. In South Africa, there is a move away from party identification, but it's still a very important cue. And then there's information networks, lived experience, perceptions of the parties and leaders, internal democracy in the parties, depth of leadership, trustworthiness, inclusiveness, competence, and then the short-term factors, so issue stances, manifestos, campaign rhetoric, the current economic and political conditions, media influence, political efficacy, do I feel my vote counts, etc., etc. But as I say, according to the theory that I subscribe, is that within all of that, the voter is reasoning through. And I really like this quote by somebody called Christopher Aiken, who says, voters do not ignore the information they have, they do not fabricate information they do not have, and they do not choose what they do not want. Okay, so of course there's much more than two possible explanations for the decline in turnout. Here and here I would be in synergy with colleagues on either side around disillusionment. I do not feel that it's around apathy, lack of interest, depoliticization, etc. Because, and the reason for that is when we look at engagement in other political activities, in protest, consultation processes, etc., we don't see a disinterested electorate or citizenry. What we do see, though, is an angry, frustrated, disillusioned electorate. And so that is where I will actually argue the explanation lies. And that links back to the theory of voting behavior. Okay, because that theory sees voters as active consumers of information. So, why then this anger, distrust, dissatisfaction? It is what was mentioned earlier in terms of the Afrobarometer data. And so this one is the one where people were asked how much do you trust each of the following, and it says the ruling party, opposition parties. It does not give the individual opposition parties, but it still gives a very good sense, because what we see here is that there's a decline in trust both in the ruling party and opposition parties. A high point in 2011, we had 61% saying that they trust the ruling party, dropping to 27% in 2021. So only 1 in 4 are saying that they do trust the ruling party. And then if you look at opposition, it's always been low, 40% in 2011, lower than the ruling party in 2021, 24%. Saying that they trust opposition parties. Okay, so I debated with myself whether to put this in. I just pulled 3 screenshots off from X, formerly Twitter, and it gives an image of what the voter might be considering in that ballot box. So you've got the ruling party at national level and in all provinces except the Western Cape, and you've got somebody on Twitter saying regarding load shedding that you've got to stop this blame game and take responsibility for the chaos going on at Eskom. And then the next one, you've got image of leaders that have left the Democratic Alliance, and it says blue experiment gone wrong. And then the third one is the image of the 2023 SONA and the user, ex-user. It still sounds strange to say that, talking about the EFF disrupting the state of the nation. Now, I haven't put other smaller parties there, but one could pull and just, as I'm saying, get a sense of what the voter is facing at the polls in terms of the options available to them. So then, coming to the perspective of the citizen in South Africa, the perspective of the citizen is that we are living in a multifaceted crisis, and it's really, I mean, it's the economic crisis, it's the cost of living crisis. There's so many different aspects to it, and we are forced to make very difficult choices every single day. Untenable choices, choices that should not need to be made. So a choice about, am I going to eat versus am I going to spend money on transport to get to work? And one can think of the other endless choices being that they faced with. And so often in the literature, the focus is on the attributes of the voter. So the identity of the voter, the language of the voter, all sorts of things about the voter, and less so on the attributes of the political parties, the choices that is being made available to the voter. Okay. And I like to think of it in terms of, so if I go into a store and I need a particular product, I can walk out of that store if the product is not suitable for me, without anybody chasing after me and saying, but you are going to destroy my store and it's going to be implication for my staff members, they're going to lose their jobs. But yet that is what we do to the voter. We say, look at this declining turnout, you are affecting democracy, you are destroying democracy, you are undermining the legitimacy of the system, but we're not asking questions sufficiently about the choice being presented. And yes, we can walk out of the store, but when you're talking about elections, we're talking about governance, and ultimately it is those votes cast that determines who is in power. But the question is, for me, can we really blame voters for being fatigued and for feeling that they maybe don't have a good choice of available options? I do think that it is, I absolutely feel that voting is important. But can we blame voters for being fatigued? And then this is the slide that you mentioned. The question was whether respondents would be willing to forego elections if a non-elected government or leader could impose law and order, deliver houses and jobs. How willing or unwilling would you be to give up the yearly elections and live under such a government? And you've got 46% saying very willing, and 21% saying willing. So you've got a majority. I think it's more of desperation. That would be the answer to that question. If you look at it in the context of answers to the other questions, where elections is a preference, etc. So if I come back to that initial slide about vertical accountability requiring certain contextual conditions, which is high turnout levels, we've seen that there is declining turnout levels combined with a credible threat of electoral alternation. I've not been able to come to that. Made possible by information on political actions, knowledgeable and engaged voters, strong parties, and this pluralistic mass media. Now, in the mass media, there's media monitoring Africa, and the coverage is actually okay. They've got very good criteria. They look at over 10,000 news items, and so that is there. My perspective is that we do have engaged voters, we do have information. The issue is on the institutionally strong parties. And I think that for me is where the weak point is, and the question marks are. So if I tie it all back and conclude, to say that all these strands do link together, and it is important, we can't write ourselves out of the equation as academics. And I think it's very important that we continue the conversation, and we relook at the importance of voting and how it affects, how declining participation affects democracy, as well as accountability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Africa. That was again a very rich input. I really appreciated how you dealt with the issue of voter apathy. We often have this very quick label of voters are apathetic, and it very quickly becomes a sort of an image of a disinterested perhaps even lazy voter. Well, that's not the issue. Look at what the other side of the middle, which is what the system offers, and what the parties offer, and what the choices are available to voters, and how hard it is to make those choices on a daily basis of any of it. So thanks very much for that input. In order to be good on time, let's go to Michael Hendrickse and for the third input, and after that we will do the Q&A. So you can make sure.
Yeah.
I will switch. Go to the seat.
Okay. Musical chairs. This is great. Michael, over to you. While you take this ready. So Michael Hendrickse is the Provincial Electoral Officer of the IEC in the Western Cape. So his task is going to be on the 29th of May, and in the run-up to it, in the aftermath, to ensure that elections in the Western Cape will be held in terms of the rule of law and orderly and fairly, or trust the results. And so that's a big task. In any event, a big task, and I think especially so in the Western Cape, there's going to be lots of competition in the Western Cape and contention. So we already wish him well for the next 2 months to make that happen. Before starting his job as the head of the Electoral Commission in the Western Cape, he was a Deputy Director General at the Department of the Premier in the Western Cape. And he's had a number of other roles. He was a member of Parliament at some point. I didn't know that. I didn't know you were a politician once. That too. So it's perfect. And he was also a law clerk for LB6 way back when. So lots of different roles that Michael has played. 12 years as a senior manager for the IEC National Office. And he also helped draft the African Charter on democracy, elections, and governance. So a man of many roles, many hats, skills, but here to talk about what lies ahead, the elections, and maybe something about voter turnouts and registration numbers. I'm very interested to hear what the latest is on Cherrel's theme of voter registration. Anyway, over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Jaap, and thank you again for the invitation. Thank you. It's good to be here. It's always I enjoy talking about elections, and I enjoy talking about democracy and then the rule of law. Because I started out as a lawyer. I actually started as a prosecutor in the 80s in Weinberg, Athlone, which explained. And then I left because I refused to do certain inferior cases and public violence cases. But that's just where I come from in terms of that. So thank you. I also just want to welcome a couple of interns here from IEC. We also offer internships to postgrads, and I'm glad they could come with me to that, and they do an awesome job there with us. So thank you very much. A couple of firstly, 1 year, elections will be on the 29th, and that the proclamation of those elections will be taking place by Friday. When the president proclaims and the 9 provincial premiers also proclaim on Friday, that means the voters' roll will close. All right. So please, if you're not registered, go out and register. We open online 24/7 until Friday midnight. You can still register or update your details or come to our local offices. So that's critical. That there's this last bit of chance. Sometimes the applicants always think there's going to be another opportunity. Don't worry. My license will expire, but don't give up. But no, the Constitution is specifically clear with regard to that. We're looking forward to having these elections, and the number of parties also that will be contesting will be quite a number. Just some observations, just from listening to the previous speakers as well. I think one of the critical things for me when we talk about elections also is we also need to always understand that within our own democracy, there are 3 actual different types of democracy. Here's the elections, and that talks to representative democracy, where we every 5 years choose our representatives, and it's critical that we hold them accountable. But yet, as citizens, we're also living in a participatory democracy, which means that there are other opportunities to hold our elected representatives accountable. It's not just every 5 years, but throughout those 5 years, and it's critical that as citizens, we need to also make use of that opportunity, rather than saying, okay, now it comes after 5 years, during that particular process. And the third, obviously, is our direct democracy. There are provisions for the fact that you can lodge petitions with the speaker in the case of local councils. There's opportunity for referendums, which is typically your most obvious examples of direct democracy. But strangely enough, also social media has become a form of direct democracy, because we can express our opinions on what we're feeling each and every day, and people take notice of those opinions on social media. So it's amazing but I think also that as citizens, we shouldn't be limiting ourselves only to saying, okay, it's participatory democracy. And how people respond is also critical. Because sometimes we have this situation of, there's elections and people vote, and the very next day you see protests. And you say, but you voted those particular people into power, and now you 2 weeks or a month later on. And there was an interesting study done, I think it was in 2011, Wits University was one of the participants. The actual study was called The Smoke That Calls. And it's about the fact that our people feel that, in order for us to get the attention of government, we need to do protest action, even burn. Because when you start doing that, when the smoke comes, government comes. And that's a dangerous sort of precedent if people believe that, if that's a way for me to actually get to where I want to, I'll go through the process of voting. But if I want something happening, so yeah, that is also to me critical how we do that. And you mentioned about information and voters being informed. I think one of the critical ways, and it was actually again emphasized in the My Vote Counts court case by the Constitutional Court, of the importance of information, of making an informed choice when you are going. And that is why that was such a seminal one, where the issue of donors and public donors and donations have to be disclosed. And I like that old adage that almost like when it comes to political parties, you're known by the donor company that you keep. Because a lot of times when you see who are donating, that obviously has to have some relevance to your information about what that party is standing and where it's going. Because as much as they are there, donors are important, but you can actually make certain conclusions based on the information about who is contesting. And knowledgeable voters, and Cherrel referred to the bounded the bounded rationality about that. And there's a lot of theories around knowledge and to what extent do we as voters, at what stage do we say, but it's too much effort to get more information. It's almost like a cost benefit analysis. I need this, but I've got enough in order to make a call. And yet, is it enough that we are doing? Is there rationality around this, the fact that you're saying, I don't need more than the information that I pick up from social media, for example. So how many of us actually do that deep dive? Often we hear the situation of saying, but who the hell must I vote for? There are 359 political parties registered at a national level. Obviously, not all will contest, but they are there. And if you really want to find out, go and do some research on those political parties before you actually say, who the hell do I vote for? And then there will be various options. It may be a good project or something from a university to start creating a resource, where people can go to and say, if I want to find out about these parties, how do I find out about it? But it's critical that we make sure that we understand who is out there and what are they standing for. Don't vote for a party based on their poster, but based on their policy. Find out what they're saying. Don't look at the promises of a party, but look at what are the actual plans that they're proposing. Because out there, you're going to just make a choice based on how many characters in the 280, instead of actually doing some sort of background deep dive on some of the political parties. That is going to be one of the ways in which we are going to enhance and strengthen our democracy, and also in a way hold political parties accountable, because then they cannot come and sell you the snake oil that they come around for every time with promises and whatever they want out there, and then so I think that's also critical. Just with regard to also some of the reasons why the people don't want to participate. Yes, apathy was mentioned, and apathy I think has been sort of almost like an abused concept. It's a use of apathetic. Apathy means you don't care. And I think that is not true. With the majority of our citizens, you cannot say people don't care. The ones who are apathetic are the ones who say, I don't need the state. They okay, I'm all right, Jack. I don't have to worry about security because I can build higher walls. I don't have to worry about houses because I can go buy another house somewhere else. So you can actually withdraw from and say, look here, I'm not actually bothered with what the state can offer me because I can actually survive without them because I'm so rich. I've got all this sort of connections or whatever. And that is the few that are apathetic. A lot of times it's about people feeling alienated from the process for a number of reasons, either because they don't see anybody out there giving a real solution or speaking to them, or, and that is more from where election management body comes from, the processes are alienating you. In the past, we were sort of accused of saying, you know what, to register, it's such a cumbersome process. You have to go stand in the queue, you fill in that RSC1 form, etc., you get a sticker on your old ID book, etc., so that became a particular issue that says, but is our process alienating people from actually wanting to access it and be registered? And then we changed, we became online. We removed all the paper. It's easy. We removed a lot of the things that you need to do. You don't have to go stand in the queue necessarily, but you can just go online 24/7. So alienation is one of the things that you look and say, how are people feeling alienated from a particular process? The third one is simply adversity. To what extent do we or the most vulnerable groups in our society sit with the situation of being in an adverse situation? We look at our homeless people, right? So we say, okay, you must have an address. Address, okay. So, but then we are biased in terms of what is an address. It has to be a formal address. So we look at that, and our legislation actually doesn't ask for an address. It says, just tell us where's your place of ordinary residence. So it doesn't matter where you stay. Just show us on a map where you are staying. But if you're not careful, you can create an adversarial system for those who are most vulnerable in our society. Whether it is to get an ID, you have to pay. You've just lost your ID in a fire. That fire typically would have happened in an informal settlement where you already don't have money. Now you lose. So are we making it possible for those victims to actually be able to get a simple thing like an ID document without paying for it? So that is the sort of adversity that you can say, is the state, to what extent are we not creating adversity for the most vulnerable? Then you also have alternatives, which I'm going to my A-list. It's an A-list I have. Alternatives. People sometimes believe that, listen, there are alternatives that I'd rather do to actually participate in. One of them I already mentioned is service protest. I can actually get more done quicker through protest action than participation. Another one is what we've come to know now as lawfare, where groups will say, I'd rather influence policy to the courts. I don't have to bother about the fact that I have to change. So I go to the courts and I fight my fight there in order to get what I want in terms of policy change or whatever benefit we're seeking to have. So people use alternatives to our democratic or rather electoral process to get where they want to. There was reference already spoken to about the anger that people feel. They're just angry. There's that thing from the Grapes of Wrath that said the line between hunger and anger is a very thin line. And people are angry, and that is holding them back from participating. They are really just, excuse for the language, but they're pissed off. Really, they just feel, why must I bother? And then obviously the avarice that some of our representatives have, the greed and the corruption, turns people away. So there's a number of reasons why we unpack that, and we need to understand those in order, for example, like an organization like the IEC, say, how do we now go out and do our vote education? How do we do our democracy education? What do we do who are the partners we have to bring in to ensure that we can promote participating in our electoral democracy? So I want to just read you a quote here that I got. It's Octavia Butler, an American fiction author I got here. She says, choose your leaders with wisdom and forethought. To be led by a coward is to be controlled by all that the coward fears. To be led by a fool is to be led by opportunists who control that fool. And to be led by a thief is to offer up your most precious treasures to be stolen. I think those are the challenges that we face as citizens. What are you going to do at the end of the day? And who you're going to give your vote for? Our elections is grounded, and this is about the rule of law. Our elections are grounded in our constitution. In the same vein that rule of law is a foundational value, regular elections in a multi-party system is also one of our fundamentals. We have political rights that not only guarantees your right to vote and to be voted for, but also within the context of free and fair elections. Because the right to vote means nothing if your elections are not free and fair. It is often said that you can have elections without a democracy, but you cannot have a democracy without elections. And it's therefore imperative that we understand that in terms of the rule of law, our elections are specifically linked within and founded in our constitution, and linked to that is a requirement for legislation. All right, and so we have a number of laws, electoral laws. We have, for example, this election, we have the Electoral Act, and you will notice that the Electoral Act and regulations are extremely detailed in terms of what the process must be. It says you must do it like this, you must do that, we must mark this finger, we must do that. Why? Because again, you want to create certainty, you want to create uniformity, and you want to be able to say to people, this is how the playing fields look, so that you don't leave it to subjectiveness. Even the commission, for that matter, cannot simply make subjective rules, because again, we are bound by the rule of law, and we have to have an objective standard which has to be rational in its application. And anybody wanting to do that can challenge us, as you can challenge a political party, but you can challenge us in a court. And I think that is critically why our elections, in the concept of rule of law, is you cannot just make these capricious or whimsical decisions. I mean, I've seen cases where in other countries where the commission will say, no, we won't order a recount, we were there. So tough luck if it was counted incorrectly, even though you could see it's a and the law doesn't hold them accountable for that. So, commissions can sit and make all kind of weird subjective decisions. In our case, we are bound by that particular rule of law. And to emphasize the point, our court structure has created a specialized court called the Electoral Court. It has the same status as a Supreme Court, but it is there to allow for quick and speedy access on electoral disputes and objections, even to determine points of law. It is so straightforward, you don't even need a lawyer to do your papers. You can simply write to the chair of the Electoral Court, and they will then either hear the matter on the papers, if it's a specific matter, or what they will do is they will designate a magistrate's court to sit as an electoral court, there where you are, to hear a factual dispute. So in other words, again, very accessible, right there, if you have a dispute about the election. And unfortunately, you have a situation where a lot of the participants in the elections, I'm talking like political parties and candidates, instead of using the avenues available for a legal dispute, they rather want to go to the street and they want to disparage the IEC and make all kind of remarks about, oh, you are not fair, or you are. I mean, we are not above criticism, definitely not. But do not make it is extremely dangerous for leaders to go out and say, yeah, but you know what nonsense is this counting of the ballot papers? It's all in secret. It's never been in secret. Agents are present, observers are present. We actually print copies of the result slip and paste it up. And then you can actually go and take a photo of that. In fact, you don't even have to take a photo. we actually scan that original result slip and put it on our website. And you can look at that scribbled result slip against what we've captured, and you can see, have we messed here with the numbers or not? There's auditors that double check it. So we are extremely transparent in order to ensure. And yet you have a situation where contestants want to rather almost like create the facts on the ground before the time. Because either they know they're not going to do so well, or they're upset because their egos took a massive beating in the polls because only 47 people vote for you. Sometimes I had a by-election out in the West Coast where there were only 2 votes. And I asked the candidate, so it's either you voted and your wife, or it's you and one of your party agents. But who is the other, unless you didn't even vote for yourself, but 2 people. He said, yeah, Michael, you see, the problem is, and I said, but brother, you were in the voting station. You were sitting there when they were counting the ballots, sorting out. You saw there what is the outcome. Yes, but I said, but there's no but. Sometimes you must just accept the fact that people don't love you as much as you do. Or the fact that you have 1,500 Facebook followers, it don't mean those are voters, man. Really. So it's amazing things. And you know what, guys? Elections is very simple. It's about making a choice. And we make choices each and every day on a range of things. So making a choice of your representative is also very easy. You have a ballot, make a thing, and that's it. But it's because of the fraud, because of the intimidation, and because of all the other underhanded, we have to have this thick book of laws. We have to create criminal offenses. We have to create a code of conduct. It should be obvious that when you're participating, guys, let's run a fair game. But it's because of the fact that you have contestants who will sometimes, they make defamatory things, they will intimidate voters. You need to now have criminal offenses, and you need to have a code of conduct in order to keep them in line. And again, the court to go to is the electoral court. That court can either issue a fine, it can disqualify a candidate, it can even deregister a party. If they deregister you, you're gone because all your candidates fall away. So it's imperative that when a citizen finds him or herself faced with a situation, either of them being offered an illegal reward or being intimidated or in some way being threatened, go lay a charge. You can't come to the IEC and lay a charge. We're not the police. All right. As much as sometimes I'd like to be, but I'm not. There is a criminal justice system in the country, and we need to follow that particular process. As is a civil jurisdiction, again with the courts, where these things can actually be articulated for and be dealt with. So I think it's critical that within that context of rule of law, the IEC operates in a very regulated manner in terms of the legislation that controls us. Just in terms of participation, currently we have, I made a note here, we have 3.295 million voters in the Western Cape. That's not more than 200,000 we had last year, so it's not bad. So the numbers have increased. And when we compare it to the census figures, so we don't take the full census, we take voting age population. In other words, citizens who are 18 years or above, and there's just over 5.1 million. So our voters roll currently reflects about 64% of the eligible voters in this province, which is not too shabby. Can be better. And I keep pushing because people ask me, what's your target? That is my target. I'm pushing that voting age population to voter ratio. That is the one that we really have to push to determine how we're doing well in terms of voter registration. It's not the number per se, but it's what is the proportion of voter age population that we are registering as well. So the IEC also has conducted, or not itself has conducted, but the HSRC has conducted surveys for us. They do it before every election and also after the election. And after they do these surveys where they interview voters who have now participated, and it's about determining voters' perceptions regarding the previous and fairness of elections, and assess also sometimes the electoral operational efficiency. But the survey covers a number of wider things, and it is available on our website too. They'll talk about things like national pride. what is it that you feel about your country, the demand for democracy, the satisfaction with democracy, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you, and then institutional trust. That is the big thing. It was raised early on because you have the overall decrease in institutional trust. And while the IEC stands out, but in a sense we also pull down because we are a state institution. You know, with that last survey was done, the trust in the commission is linked to the overall views of democracy. 75% of those that were part of the survey were very satisfied with democracy in the Western Cape. Of those particular persons that were then interviewed and part of the survey, in terms of their perceived electoral freeness and fairness in the Western Cape, the overwhelming majority of the voters in 21, that was close to 96%, felt the election procedures were free and fair. So it's important for us not just to see the result, but how we are doing, and not our own, just not for ourselves. Because the adage is the eye cannot see the eye. No? You need somebody else to tell you what's happening as well. And I think that for me is also clear for me as well. So you have this situation, and like I said, I already mentioned the thing of political parties. And overall, the challenge is, and you're right with the of the declining participations, 89.3% in 99, 76, 77, 73 between 2004, and then this dropped to 66% in 2020 and 2019. Obviously, counter to that, that's national elections. In local government elections, it's much lower. So for 2021, it was at 46%. 2011, 2016, it was at 57%. So in terms of participation, you obviously see that participation in national elections, and I think it's also because of the hype that's created and the opportunity for actually being part of. And I think this particular election, and there's so many new players on the block, they're all coming out, and I've been looking at and watching them, who's actually, because remember, there's a new requirement. If you're not currently in parliament, you also need to give us a particular number of signatures of people who support you. So far, I've got 8 new parties that's going to be on my ballot in the Western Cape that I know. Obviously, when those who are currently in parliament come in, you'll start more, but they'll have some time to still capture signatures. And then also for independence, and that I think is also that we can actually have independents also contesting the election. And as you know, their threshold has been reduced to 1,000 voters flat in terms of indicating support. And I think that is also critical, that you are actually expanding on the choices that are being made available to you. You're not only limited. So when you say, but who do I vote for, what party? There's independents. Go check them out. Some of them, I think, would have very good track records. So look at who the candidates are, and then you can determine how you participate in our elections. Yeah. So that's where I'm going to end for now. And then, but thank you very much again for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thank you. Beautiful reports and from practice, the real issues that are occupying the IAC and making these elections happen. And I really appreciate how you embedded the role of the IAC in the rule of law. I think we shouldn't underestimate. What is it? 359 political parties that will, most of them, or many of them, will in the end compete, but all of them are gearing up to compete. And each and every one of them knows how elections ought to be run, and they all exert pressure on the IAC to decide this or decide that. I still remember the stories of your predecessor, Prof. Sampson, having to refuse a very large political party its submission of candidates because 1 minute over the deadline.
Yep.
Sorry, as big and as important as you are, and you are too late. Sorry. And that's what the rule of law in elections demands. Because if you let that slip, then electoral integrity is anyone's guess, anyone's game. So thank you very much for that really fantastic input. So now it's time for some questions and answers. I'm going to ask Prof. Kummeling to join us in front.
I feel very comfortable.
Are you fine? I've got a seat for you again. So let's hear from you. What you make of this wide variety of inputs brought together a common theme of rule of law, democracy, and the concern that we have about the declining trust in public institutions. With narrative from the Netherlands, with a state commission specifically tasked to investigate this and come up with solutions, recommendations. The storyline of South Africa's electoral history, declining voter participation. What do we make of that? Is it voter apathy? No, it's a lack of alternatives, a lack of options available in the system, behavior of political parties. And then the importance of running credible elections, and how that makes such a critical part in our overall democracy. So lots to chew on, lots to discuss. So I'm going to ask a few of you to, if you want to ask your question, and maybe we can also check online if there are people who want to make an input online. They can use the chat box. I think that's probably the best way to do it, and maybe one of my colleagues can have a quiz of the chat box to see if there's any questions coming through, and I'll give you the floor, to bring them on. Now, when it comes to elections and politics and democracy, we are all experts, and that's true. But I do ask you to keep your inputs brief. I always enjoy the participant who starts a long story, and I keep wondering, is there a question on the horizon somewhere? So let's try to avoid that so that we give as many people as possible an opportunity. And you can address your question to anyone on the panel, or all three, or just in general. That's all good. But please just mention before you give your question your name, perhaps where you're from. That would also be very useful. So the floor is open. Anyone who wants to ask a question or make an observation. I see back, and then Evan, maybe we should do those four, and then number 5. Okay, so let's start with Johnny.
So Siva Moodley, online participant, is asking, are we moving towards compulsory registration linking with home affairs, SARS, etc.? We will save a lot of costs.
Right. Thank you. That's a very important question. Do we need to move towards a different system for voter registration? For example, in the Netherlands, we don't need to go and register to vote. You are registered on the population register, and thereby are they also entitled to vote, so it's automatically linked. Would be great to have that. Is it possible? Is it feasible? Good question.
The figure of 359 parties, then you throw a couple of independents there as well. The first election that we had, I think, famous ballot paper, there were 17 things. Now you have a booklet. Now, when does this open principle of democracy, anyone can stand with 1,000 votes, come on the ballot, destroy or make it more difficult for people to exercise, to find the face or the emblem or whatever, and therefore actually undermining democracy in order to facilitate democracy in the one sense.
Thanks. Very pertinent question. Are we making the ballot too complicated, long, too diverse, that actually starts undermining the knowledgeable voter, and we expect voters to make sense of all these names and emblems scattered all over a booklet and not just a ballot paper?
Thank you. My name is Hendrickse. I'm an unemployed graduate. My question is around the issue of weak democracies, such as Kenya, South Africa, and India. These are democracies. They foster they foster freedom in democratic institutions, but they are incapable of delivering great services and good economic growth to young people. Question is there value in participating in voting situations like that? That's one. Two, I've come across people saying the outcome of every election is not determined by the voters, but by those who count. I want to check the authenticity. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Two very pertinent questions as well. Is there value in voting when the state weak does not deliver, and who actually determines the results? That's, you have the panel on that. And then number 5. Yes, sir. Sure.
About the role of the digital technology and social media. How does plan for shaping the landscape of the political discourse, engagement, reports, and integrity of electoral process? And what about the role?
Context of electronic voting. But I think that's already quite a handful. So let's just go back to the panel and ask them to pick up on one or two or more of the questions that they feel they have something to say about, and then we see if we can cover all questions.
Picking up on the last question. We did initially use also in the Netherlands all kinds of digital tools, voting machines, all these other things as well, in order to reduce all the complication. All these huge paper ballots. But in the end, people start to distrust within the public system. As well, they're going to be manipulated. So then we abandoned some years ago the use of voting machines, or digital ways of voting. Also, internet voting is quite common for some of the European countries. And then when it comes to the other issues, social media, you briefly touched upon that during my talk. I think that Michael is quite right in saying that you can get a lot of information through social media. But what we see over the years, and there's a lot of research being done, also by political scientists, Cherrel can say more about it, is that the use of social media leads to a further fragmentarization in politics, further fragmentarization also in the sense that there are more parties in politics, because these political parties don't talk to each other anymore when it comes to in parliamentary sessions for organizing a consensus for the country or for the municipality or whatever. They simply are interacting with their own people. So and talking about their own identities and their own wishes, and they only want to, let's say, comfort their own specific type of focus. So it makes the consensus making in Parliament extremely difficult. Organize more parties, and they really respond more and more to what's happening on social media, even during parliamentary sessions. Parliamentarians are not talking with each other, talking to each other. Simply with their voters or whatever support that they have. So I'm not very much a supporter of social media within the electoral process, especially not in politics in general. And it's what we see also in social media is that you feed the monster and it will get out the monster, and it's not very helpful in creating consensus or central. So it's one of my first things.
Maybe Cherrel, you want to go next? Keep the order as it was.
For gathering myself, I think a lot of the questions are actually from Michael. There's one that I would want to take, and that is around the question of is there value in voting? And the participant says or asks the question about weak democracies. So democracies fostering freedom and the procedural side, but not the substantive side. And then asking, is there value in voting? And from my side, the answer is yes. and it comes back to this threat of alternation. So if you have a situation where you don't have regular elections, and let's say a leader or political party is guaranteed they're going to be in power for the next 40 years, there's very little incentive to actually consider the needs of the citizen. If you know that there's going, as a leader, you know there's going to be an election, okay, and there's a threat of being voted out. It's not a guarantee that there will be a higher responsiveness or more accountability, but it propels the leader towards that. And I actually think that for those who feel that there's no change or disillusion, they actually have more of an investment, as Michael says, more of an investment in voting. And so I think that it is actually very important. Where I disagree a little bit with Michael is, yes, we've got all these choices, yes, we've got all these parties, but it doesn't necessarily mean in the mind of the voters that there is a good quality. If I can use almost like a latest example also on how the turnout affects the outcome. So you mentioned 64% registered, right? Yeah. So if you say that, just pretend that 64% is 64 people, right? And say 64 out of 100, and that 100 people, we say we're 100 here, and we need to make a really important decision. Okay. If 40 out of 100 vote in a particular way, that 40 is a minority, but that 40 out of that 64 is a majority. So there is power in the vote, and that threat of losing power is a very important incentive, because I believe that people, whether it's citizens, whether it's the media, whether it's political parties, we operate according to incentives. So for me, I do feel that there is value in the vote.
I'm not sure if I agree with you. This juxtapose what is happening in China, Russia, and Singapore. Those are strong democracies. I mean, strong authoritarian.
Yes.
And a strong authoritarian vote. They deliver excellent economic growth. They deliver excellent economic growth, which can somehow absorb those people, they've got limited human rights in some part. And the question is, I want us to give value to this value of voting. There are people who have got limited human rights, someone else. They don't have similar crises that we have, with all the freedoms that we enjoy. That's what my point is.
Yeah. Chair,
All right, quick response.
a real quick response. My question would be, is it democracy that is in crisis, or is it governance?
You should tell us.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. To me, there is a governance crisis. And when I relate that story, that personal story, the worst part of the story is that it's a common story, and it's not the worst story. And I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think we're supposed to be valuing our democracy and also looking at economic growth and the things that you talk about, the substantive delivery. But it's just a mistake.
I suppose it's also quite an important distinction that was made in Professor Kummeling's presentation about support for democracy, but disappointed in politicians. That's, I think, is an important distinction that we can also make. But anyway, let's move on to Michael for quite a few.
Yeah, but I think this support Cherrel. It's not an either or, democracy or economic. I think that as much as you have examples that you refer to, which is also contestable, but you also have democracies where there's economic growth happening. So I don't think it's about democracy per se. It's about the governance and the people that we put there. And if you're not participating, how are you going to then change the people that are there? You have a lot of situations where in Europe, I think it was Tony Blair came to power with 37% of the support. Although, he became prime minister of a country that has nuclear weapons, with 37% people support. So the only way that you strengthen that democracy and hold people accountable is through, I believe, one of them is through participating on them. So if I go back to the first question was around compulsory registration, because the right to register or not to register is your choice. If you're going to impose it, you're actually imposing an obligation on somebody to deregister. You're first putting in there, and then you're saying it's up to you, you must now do something to get yourself deregistered. So in '98, when the IEC started, one of the considerations was to take the national population register, where we have all our IDs. But it was also felt that at that particular stage, because, for example, there were still a lot of Namibians on our national population register because of the past colonial sort of situation. And therefore, it came to a situation where you say, rather create our own voters roll, and we keep it updated and we can manage it. Yes, we run it against the population register in terms of deceased persons or persons who are not citizens, etc. But at this particular stage, the voter registration is there. What we can look at maybe is saying, okay, why don't we also extend the registration facility to the extent that if you're going for your driver's license, you are asked the option, would you like to also register there? Or when you get your ID, or you can maybe extend it now that we're moving into the electronic age with registration. We can maybe still offer you that, but to simply say because you exist, I'm automatically to make you, that may be a bit problematic. But certainly we can look at that. Prof, yes, the political parties, when does it become to the DRC had 40,000 candidates in the last election. And it was literally a newspaper size ballot that you have to look at. But I think in 2019 we had 48 parties, so it's manageable. We looked at the ballot paper size, and there's a limit to the size that you can print this ballot paper, and we can always safely accommodate 48 contestants because it's independence. And if we have to have more than that, we'll have a 2-column ballot paper. And that can accommodate up to 96 participants. And we don't think it's going to be more than that. The problem is if it goes up to 100, then you have the extra page. Then it becomes problematic. But I don't think that should be a logistic issue. Shouldn't be sort of a consideration to limit participation in the sense of saying you must be able to get up there and do it. There are other ways in which you can also determine rather whether you are not frivolous. We have the signature requirement, you have the deposit requirement, and just the fact that you need to go out there and have some level of organization. So not everybody will participate. Yes, there is impact in terms of the number of parties, because more parties and more ballot papers means we take longer to, a voter takes 3 minutes longer in the booth now, because it's got 3. And then also we need another 2 to 3 hours to count that additional ballot. The 3 ballots that we have. So it does have a sort of knock-on effect, but I think overall it's about getting a logistics solution to that, and not necessarily curbing that particular situation. Participate. One example about what people always think, but if I participate, but my vote won't make a difference. You're giving your opinion, and your opinion will always matter. It doesn't mean that because you're voting, therefore your party must win or your candidate must win. You're expressing your opinion. And 2 things. I use for example, of the Dhaka party. A couple of years the Dhaka party was formed in 2008. And their express thing was to get marijuana legalized. They didn't get 1 seat in parliament, but today marijuana is legalized. Why? Because you put the issue on the table. Sometimes that is enough. That people express that and they say it's a good thing. I'm not saying it was because of it, but what I'm saying is they didn't actually get a seat anywhere, but it influenced a discourse. And also political parties are sort of funny characters. They're actually going to look at what everybody who was voting, how many people were voting for the other parties, because they're going to try and amend their policy so that in the next election, they're going to say, oh, the 40,000 people voted for party X based on their one. I maybe need to be more responsive to that. So you may not influence the party, your party may not win, but you have some influence in terms of that. So I think it's critical for us to bear that in mind. Digital, yeah, digitals and electronic voting. Firstly, there was a survey done again by International IDEA, 172 countries, and I think only it was like not even 15 had electronic voting. Now, can I just say that we distinguish between electronic voting and online voting. Electronic voting is where you have a machine, which is a standalone machine, and you have your characters on there, and you will literally almost like a calculator. It's a standalone, it's not linked to the internet at all. So you make your choices on there. Immediately when voting stops, you flip a switch and it will print out a little receipt, like your poll slip with the result. So immediately you have a result. You don't have to wait for counting and all. India has been very successful. Brazil has been very successful with regard to that. And it's actually a thing that the person can look at. But that is electronic voting. But why it works is one, it saves on the cost of ballot papers, etc. But importantly, it's never linked to the internet. So it cannot be hacked because the results get printed. Online voting, however, and there's about 4 countries in the world, I think Estonia is one of them that actually do online, but they are small, very literate sort of country, and they can do it. But for the majority, given the hacking threat, because even without banks, things get hacked, even though they spend all the money. So you have, on the one hand, the hacking threat for online voting, and secondly, everything you do online has an audit trail. Everything. So if you make a choice now, they can actually track back to who made that choice, which means that your secrecy of your ballot becomes then sort of threatened. Because even your bank, if you go now and say, listen, I want to see what the activities took place 3 years ago, they'll tell you. Why? Because there's always an audit trail on it. So until we get to a stage where we can actually make sure that your ballot will be secret, and that somebody can't run a program that will be able to identify voter this and it will be a challenge. But I think certainly in terms of electronic voting, where you have a machine that makes it easier for people to vote and quicker to count, etc., like that. And it removes spoiled ballots, by the way, because you can only press a button, you can't press 2 buttons. But certainly electronic voting is something that the person can look at, but not necessarily at this stage. I think online. A link to that, obviously, also, sorry, Jaap, is the fact that our network coverage is very, you can have the rich people in the rich suburbs having data access and things like that, and the poor areas where the coverage is not, because the companies go where the money is. They're not going to spend millions of where they can't get cover their cost of outlet. So even that too is a problem also in terms of the data, the network coverage of our country. Where most probably the most vulnerable will not be able to access online voting.
Great, thank you. I was very rude earlier. I had promised Prof. to ask his question, and I skipped him completely. So sorry. So he gets the first. So Prof. is from the United States, from MIT, from a democracy that we all supposed to admire. Sometimes we are being hard. But still, great to have you, and please ask a question. And just see if there's anyone else who wants to come in, because it will be the last round. So number 1, number 2, number 3, and then number 4, and then the questions.
Yes, and indeed, some of my perspectives on South African democracy, there's such a negative perspective that comes from South Africans, comes from my perspective in the U.S., where I say, well, take a look at how we're feeling and how so many other places around the world are feeling. So maybe South Africa is not in as bad shape as you say. And along those lines, I guess my question, particularly for Cherrel Africa, concerns how we use survey research, because maybe we're stuck with the questions that get asked, but one of the questions is, well, would you be willing to give up democracy if a strong leader was better at delivering services? And substantial numbers of people say yes. But of course, that question doesn't ask. And remember that strong leader, might repress certain minorities, won't tolerate dissent, and will throw people in jail for a long period of time, in order to maintain security. And, you know, and some minorities may be completely excluded from access to power or other things, because that's the way it works in non-democracies. So, you know, all the stuff that gets built in, you know, we can talk about China, but, you know, there's a whole group, the Uyghurs, who are, you know, completely excluded, and that's what happens in these authoritarian regimes. So, you know, I just wonder if in some of the survey questions that get asked, the only thing that people have in their mind is, oh yeah, we have some great benevolent leader where everything's going to be fantastic. Sure, I would rather have that than democracy. But in most non-democracies in the world, there are authoritarians who are repressive, and you don't actually get better economic growth. So, wondering about the, you know, the survey questions we ask, and then how they get communicated back to society.
Right, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Hanns Seidel. So actually, I came in very late at the lecture, so I could only got at the microphone. You're talking about, you know, voter education and having to have the information of the political parties to see and to who to vote for. So my question now is the voter education sufficient to make a decision only based on the policies of the political parties or SNA? Because my thing is that looking at people in the Eastern society in terms of, are you able to build homes? Are you, you know, like the livelihood, especially within South African context, we want to see tangible change, and looking at so many political parties, and you are speaking about, you know, funding. So you are not even, without getting the funding from whatever donor, you cannot broadcast it on SABC, for instance, to be known, because we only know very few because myself have been within active, but a lot of them don't know that. So you can't even get to go and look for, you can't get information on something that you're not aware of. So that voter education, is it public on the IEC, what you call it, of all the political parties, the information? But I don't think that is sufficient or enough, because the people want to see tangible change and say, okay, for you to lead South Africa nationally, do you have any governance experience, or do you have any leadership, or whatever information you have? So that's my somehow.
Thank you, great question.
I'm Ranjit, second year. So my question is perhaps political. I wanted to ask if maybe is it not time that we move towards power sharing in the executive scheme? If I'm not mistaken, the ruling party needs only a simple majority for them to be able to elect their president theoretically, and the president then appoints his cabinet or head levels. So you get perhaps the minority, but a much large percentage of the minority who are not covered in the governance of the national governance in essence of the cabinet. So it's about time that we move towards sharing the power that if the party gets this much percentage of votes, maybe they can have votes 2 seats the cabinet.
Great, wonderful question. And then last one is, I think, from online.
Yes, so we've got an online participant, Ezekiel Kikona from the Helen Suzman Foundation, that's asking to Michael, do you think that the IEC has done enough work to engage those who choose not to vote in 2019 to have an interest in voting in this election?
Great, thank you very much. So let's go back to the panel. We are a little bit over time already, which is a good sign. Means that we are still engaged and we are committed, but we can't detain everyone for too long. So if you can keep your answers as short as you can, that would be appreciated.
First of all, a question about Professor Lieberman. We did these type of surveys in the Netherlands, and I was referring to during my talk. And the people were pointed to the consequences of what they were saying, that we need strong lead, etc., it's affecting minorities. But the thing is, and it's also due to the, let's say, the populist view of politics, is people tend to think that they're not going to be one of the minorities. We are true Dutch. We are the true Dutch majority, and it's going not going to affect me or us. I think that's also a very relevant thing. So and that's can be taken into account. And the last question is about coalitions and power sharing. A lot of experts know a lot about these things. And I think that a lot of countries are very familiar with the idea that there are coalition cabinets, and they function in many cases very well. And indeed, the gentleman has already gone. There's a lot of evidence that democracies deliver better in general than authoritarian regimes. And coalition cabinets, in many cases, take into account more and more, let's say, the diversity of the country, the separate wishes of people in the country. So in the long run, they are in many cases better for the population, the province, than let's say the simple majority systems. But we can have a huge discussion on that. And we're going to have a PhD this year. Prof.
Survey research. So I think surveys are useful because it provides us with a basis for data-driven discussions. But at the same time, it's a blunt instrument, especially an instrument like Afro.
As nou een restaurant loop.
In terms of contact person or whatever the case, that you'll find on our website, but we won't keep a detail. And as I indicated earlier on, it may be something where you can actually create a project at the university to say, let's create a repository of where you can actually find information on that, or make it easier. But as you said, social media, Google, you might be able to get that sort of thing as well. And then in terms of sharing of information, I know that, for example, in CASA's rules will make once you are participating, you will get X number of free public, what they call it, public service benefit type of time. So you don't need to pay for your adverts on TV or the radio, but they give based on a formula that they do. So there is a level of where you can access some state access to publicity. And obviously you can also advertise, but there's those particular yeah, we had a government of national unity, but that was out of the goodness of people's hearts at the time, you know, where we said in the interim constitution, you know, for the first government, we must be a government, and you had situations where other opposition leaders were in cabinet posts, like the was Home Affairs. So it is possible. So you have to ask the question: is it based on sort of goodwill, where you come together for the good of the country, and you say let's open it, or do you have some legal instrument that says, like you have in local government, where you say we will have an executive committee structure, and based on your support, you get X number of seats on the cabinet or whatever. So yeah, that is obviously something that can be looked at. I think it's something which obviously become a lot in the fore with the whole talk about coalitions now and what may happen, etc. So that's going to be interesting. Did the IC do enough in terms of people who did not participate in 2019? So firstly, one, people don't participate for a lot of reasons, but what we do as the IEC, we go out and, in fact, the outreach project is something which is continuous all the time. We don't stop with our outreach. Just in the last year, we've had over 4,000 events where we go out and engage with members of the public. And sometimes in the meeting, sometimes literally at a Tucson center or at a clinic or wherever people are congregating. We visit our campuses, we go to Tibet campuses as well. In the last 2 years, we've done over 200 schools per year where we actually go to schools. And we're hoping to have a more structured engagement with the education department, where during LO, we have better civic education and democracy education sessions that will help people to say, listen, when you do get to the stage where you vote, how do I approach that? What are the questions I ask of the politicians and the parties? How do we go about it? So it is a challenge. It's an ongoing process that we need to do, and it's critical for us as the IEC, because voting at the end of the day is a small part. It's about strengthening our democracy, which is the core function of the commission at the end of the day. I'll talk a lot on.
No, it's really important. Thank you so much to all the panelists. I'm sure this was a very rich, wonderful discussion. We started very conceptual, rule of law, understanding the rule of law and how it relates to democracy. Fascinating insights from the Netherlands and how they engage with improving the rule of law and the agenda for rule of law in every municipality, in every province. Some fascinating ideas coming across the table, and engage with the story of South African elections and the nitty-gritty, and how important the nitty-gritty is of protecting our electoral integrity in the run-up to elections. A lot of people to thank. I will start thanking the President. The President had foresight to announce the date last night to give our seminar an extra boost. So thanks to the President. But thanks to all of you. Thanks to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. To the audience, also thanks to the online audience. Thank you so much for being here and expertly chaired and moderated by Dr. Wright, your Hendrickse. So thank you very much for your assistance. I want to thank Tenas Chikwata, who was the driving force behind all of this, was put it together and deserves thanks for that. The Hanns Seidel Foundation, our sponsors, the National Research Foundation, which is also sponsoring this event. Laura Wellen, who got very nervous at some point with the numbers exceeding what we had planned, but this is great. We all huddled up in a slightly too small venue, but it makes it exciting. It makes it good. So thanks, Laura, for your hard work. The AVSTK and the previous Rector, and I think that is the people that I wanted to thank, but in what else that I forgot to bear with me. And then please join us outside for some eats and drinks, and all the best. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.